Hi, everyone. My name is Chisu Lyons, and I lead an innovation team at FICO. It is my pleasure to introduce Sabrina Coleman. Sabrina Coleman is the founder and managing principal at Mahogany Coaching and Development, MCND, which is a boutique consulting practice which specializes in partnering with leaders in building inclusive workplaces where all talent can thrive and realize their potential. With a commitment to helping diverse leaders and professionals thrive in the workplace and beyond, and an emphasis on underrepresented women who are often the least supported. Sabrina has an amazing background, building on her experience gained over 20 years as an internal and external change agent. Sabrina lived and worked in 3 countries, partnering with global and domestic leaders, helping to effect change across more than 30 countries in life sciences, technology, and social sectors. She shifted her focus to supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, leveraging her personal experience as a woman of color in leadership position. Recognizing the struggles many organizations have in addressing DEI issues, the compounded challenges faced by the intersection of race and gender, and that resolving these issues require multi-dimensional constructs and support at every level of an organization. It was clear to see where her skills would be best utilized. She now uses her education, expertise, and practical experience in the development and support of internal leaders, diverse talent, change agents, and their organizations. Please help me welcome Sabrina Coleman to lead us in this workshop.
Hello,
Just a
everyone.
reminder,
Go ahead,
Sabrina, if you want to use the chat feature, please share with all attendees and panelists choice. Thank you. Over to you, Sabrina.
Thank you, Chisu. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending our Emerging Leaders Managing Self to Managing Others interactive session. We are going to try our best to make this session as interactive as possible. We have a chat manager with us today who will be looking at your questions coming in and your comments, so please feel free to send them to us. And I also have 3 guest panelists joining me today for our session who will introduce themselves shortly. But before we jump into the content and our discussion, I see you all have already started sharing with us where you're joining our session from, so that's great. Keep letting us know where you're in. Welcome, Ireland. You're coming a long way to be with us today, so I really am appreciating that. Okay, let's get started. So our session today is going to focus in 2 areas, primarily, and also we have some polls that's going with our session today. Please feel free to provide your input to the polls as well. That also helps us to know who's in the virtual room with us. All right, so today's session, we're going to focus primarily in 2 areas. First and foremost is, why should organizations groom their leaders from the inside? Why should they fill their leadership pipeline with their internal talent pool? And then our secondary objective today is also, what should you know in terms of making a decision as to whether or not you want to remain as an internal leader, an individual contributor, or whether or not you want to transition into a formal leadership role. I'm trying to get my tongue untied, but give me 1 second. I will get in the flow in just 1 second. All right, let's get started with our panelists. Now, we have 3 great guest panelists with us today, and what I'd like us to do is start off with Kimberly, and then we're going to go with Jill and then Jesse. Our panelists will introduce themselves as they answer the first question that I have for us that I've teed up. So the first question that I have is, why should organizations grow internal leaders? Why not just bring in external leaders from the outside who often come in with new ideas and a fresh approach. Kim, let's start with you.
Hi, welcome everybody. My name is Kim McLeod. I am an inclusion recruiting analyst at ServiceNow. Prior to that, I served as Director of Business Development at Command It, which is the Center for People and Minorities, Center for Minorities and People with Disabilities in IT. For 8 years. And prior to that, I worked at the Anita Borg Institute, now known as AnitaB.org, where I did leadership development and academic initiatives, and also managed their Women of Color initiatives. So to answer Sabrina's question, I would say, foremost in my mind, especially working with underrepresented populations, one of the things that you want to do is definitely grow your talent and within, because you want to make sure that you're retaining your talent, particularly for women of color. This is especially important when you're in an organization where you feel like you're not valued and appreciated. You're looking at leaving your organization. And with the numbers the way they are, especially for technology, if you don't grow your own talent, someone else is going to poach them. And if your talent is happy where they are, you're less likely to lose that and retain your employees.
100% agree. Hi, everybody. My name is Jill Wetzler. I'm the head of engineering at Pilot, a bookkeeping service that's powered by software. I started my career at Salesforce.com. I was an engineer. I switched into a management role, I think in my 7th year at Salesforce. From there, I went on to manage teams at Twitter. Built out the infrastructure engineering org at Lyft for 3 years, and then did kind of a brief stint at Lyft, developing managers, specifically first-time managers, line managers, and second-line managers. So I have a few thoughts for this question. First of all, I second Kim. I think developing leaders builds loyalty in your organization. If you're being invested in, you're much more likely to stay. I think second of all, you really get the advantage of people's knowledge and expertise. Decisions in organizations are best when they're pushed down to the front lines. And so if you're actually developing people who have experience on the front lines, you're going to get better decision-making in your leadership. And then the third one is kind of funny, is you get to mold your managers the way that you want to. It takes a really long time for me to hire managers because it's very tough for me to find people who manage in the same style that I want and that vibes with my organization. So for example, a lot of times I'm finding people who are more of a technical lead than they are a people manager. And that's because they come from an organization that values technical leadership over people management. And so developing people internally is really an opportunity to teach people to manage in the way that I think fits best with my organization.
Great. Thank you, Jill. Jesse.
Hello, future leaders and managers and leaders. My name is Jesse Citizen. I am currently a coach, life coach, executive coach with Mahogany Coaching and Development, which is owned by Sabrina Coleman. My background is that I recently retired from 12 years of federal service. For those of you who are aware of the Pentagon, I spent 12 years working there as a federal servant. Prior to being on the Pentagon staff, I traveled the world as a member of the United States Air Force, where I retired after 32 years in 2006. And so my experience with the question has been hiring from within, vice hiring someone to come in from outside or external from your organization. I agree with the previous panelists, but I would add that in addition to their comments, you have the opportunity from hiring internal to have someone that you trust and that you know that they understand your organization culture, the way the mission, the operation is ran, what are the values, what are your levels of integrity that is involved in those activities. You're going to hear Sabrina talk more about that. But those are some key things that when you hire from within, you also encourage those that witness that to become higher performers and higher achievers. If you don't hire from within and bring in someone from external, do you have an opportunity to discourage people and cause people to leave your organization? Now, I've hired as a senior manager within defense, I've hired individuals from both paths. Usually I hired externally when we needed a specific skill type in innovation and or in some technical field. Externally, I've groomed leaders at the various levels at which I have served, and there has been many. Thank you for that opportunity.
Great, thank you, Jesse. So we have some poll questions that have been up on the screen for a little while now, and I would love to hear from those of you who are in our audience right now in terms of how many of you are considering making that transition into formal leadership if you are an individual contributor. Are any of you currently right now a leader or a manager, and or you team leaders? Let us hear from you. We'd like to know, because this also helps me in terms of how I'm sharing different information with you. Thanks. I want to thank the panelists for those answers. We're going to get back to our panelists in just 1 second. But one of the other questions that I have, let me add my response to what the panelists just said, and then we'll go to the next question that I have teed up for the panelists. So I agree with everything that the panelists have said, but also in addition to that, one of the reasons why bringing in external leaders as a practice, an ongoing practice, is not a good approach comes down to, I think, 3 simple reasons. One is because your internal people have an institutional knowledge that usually when they leave, it goes out the door with them. Very few organizations that I've seen have a really good process for knowledge management and maintaining their internal institutional knowledge. So when you grow people within your organization to a certain level, and then they leave your organization to go lead somewhere else, all of that knowledge and everything you've invested in them goes out the door with them. Secondly, and Jesse touched on this as well in terms of the culture. Learning a culture in an organization is half of the battle. You will go in as a technologist, but also learning the culture is going to be one of the key aspects of whether or not you're going to be able to succeed at that organization. And so growing and developing your leaders internally, they've already learned how to navigate the terrain within that organization and the culture. And then thirdly, it can be very costly to continue to bring in external leaders. Now, let me also just say this. There is a time and a place for bringing in external leaders. Once again, as all of the panelists have alluded to, sometimes it is the right choice to bring in an external leader. Sometimes you might want to be taking the team or the department in a different direction, and bringing in an external person is the right thing to do. But as an ongoing practice, that's not always necessarily the right thing to do. I also see that there are some questions that are coming up. What we'd like you to do is we will allocate some time at the end of our session for a Q&A. So stay tuned. We're going to run through the content with our panelists, and we're going to get to the questions as soon as we get an opportunity. All right, so let's move forward. And I'll tell you all, I in full transparency, this is a little challenging for me because I am typically an experiential facilitator, and so I am accustomed to engaging with people in real time and engaging with the energy in the room. So just being a speaker who talks at people is something that I'm learning to do in this new age that we're in. So just bear with me. All right. So since most organizations have opted to develop and grow their talent from within into the leadership position. Let's take a look at why some of the organizations are doing this and what are some of the best practices associated with this process. All right, so most organizations have a model that they use in terms of growing their talent pipeline and filling their pipeline from within. And my panelists, as I go through some of these slides, if there's anything that you want to add, feel free to jump in as well. So most organizations have a model that they use where they match basically aspiring leaders with leadership requirements at each stage of the leadership process. Most of us tend to think that when we transition from an individual to individual contributor into a management role, that's pretty much where it stops. You know that there's promotions involved, but what isn't always as clear is that there is a transition process that takes place at each stage of your growth as a leader as well. And what research shows is that there's typically 6 stages or passages or transitions that take place as you grow into being a leader. And transitioning from an individual contributor to managing others is that first transition process. We're going to unpack this a little bit more in 1 second. Also, I just want to add here that this is where talent development specialists also tell us this is the best way of filling your internal leadership pipeline for organizations. All right, so I am going to lower my poll so I can actually see my bullets here. All right, so the first thing is succession planning. One of the set of questions that we have is, I'm not sure how many of you in your organization are currently using succession planning, but if you're not, let's set that aside for a second. I'll come back to that in 1 minute. Succession planning is primarily the, I would say, key tool used in developing and growing internal leaders. It allows organizations to identify leadership candidates early on. And so I know when I was still in technology and I had a team, one of the first things that I did when I came on board to my team was identify who my successor was. And as we went through the projects that we were on, I always kept that in mind. So if there were things that I had to do that were specifically tailored to leadership or me as a manager, I would bring him in on a lot of those discussions and a lot of that decision making, so it would help to groom him and help him start to develop and lean into becoming a leader. So that's the first thing that succession, having a formalized succession planning process helps to do. The second thing is, in addition to identifying leadership candidates early, is what also works part and parcel with the succession planning is often what we call individual development plans. And again, I'm not sure how many of you are utilizing individual development plans within your organization, but it is also a highly recommended tool that managers use in order to help develop their internal leaders. Also, it's not just for developing leaders. If you choose to stay on the technical track, it is also a good idea to have an individual development plan. An individual development plan is typically an annual plan where you and your manager sit down and talk about what it is that you want to do, where you are looking to go in your career, what are your career aspirations, is there another part of the organization you want to be in, do you want to work abroad? I mean, some of the opportunities that I did in terms of working abroad, I started here in the US and I let my manager know that that's what I was interested in doing, which is how I ended up working abroad. So it is important to put these things into your individual development plan. Now, I also want to add something here, because this is the last bullet, but this is very important to pull through each one of these bullets, and that's viewing your advancement as a partnership with your manager. I do a lot of career coaching with diverse talent, And one of the things that I often say to them is it is very important that you recognize that you are the master of your career. You are responsible for your career, not your manager, not your organization. No one is going to advocate for you better than you. So if you are not working with an individual development plan with your manager, it might be something that you can bring. You can pull a template down offline. And this is a good landing spot for you and your manager to partner in terms of where it is that you're trying to go to in the organization, especially if you are interested in transitioning from the technical track onto the leadership track. So the individual development plan typically has your career goals and objectives for that year, or maybe 1 to 2 years. What's then connected on the individual development plan is next the career development portion. Whatever professional training and or personal growth training that you might need in order to succeed as being an effective leader. And effective is the key word here. And we're going to come back to that again in 1 second. But any training that you see yourself needing in order to support your transition into the leadership role, you want to start getting that now. You don't want to necessarily wait until you become a leader. You want to be prepared, because in my experience, most times organizations promote people who are already performing at the next level in which they're hired into. They don't wait until you get into that level and then promote you. So you want to start thinking about some of those things that you will need now. And we're also going to talk about in a little bit what are some of the types of professional development you will need, as opposed to some of the type of training that you might be taking now. The other thing that you might want to include in your individual development plan as a part of your development process in transitioning to becoming or moving into a formal leadership position will be what we call stretch assignments. And I'm sure most of you are probably familiar with that as well. A stretch assignment will give you exposure potentially to other parts of the organization, potentially to other technology, to other managers and leaders within the organization. But what it also does is it tees you up to, again, gain some of that experience and knowledge and expertise that you might not have in your day-to-day role. What we often think about is, as a part of the development process, we focus on the professional development, but the professional development is only one part of it. The stretch assignments also gives you that additional real-time, real practice. Although it is real-time and it is a little riskier, what it does is it enables you, particularly if we know that this is a stretch assignment, you can then set yourself up to get the support that you need while you still have the training wheels on. The other part that goes with stretch assignments is it gives you visibility. And so asking to be put on high visibility projects is one of the things that is also very important for diverse talent, particularly women and women of color. So these are things that you want to make sure are included as a part of your IDP process. Timely feedback. If you are not getting feedback from your manager, when you get off of this session, schedule some time to speak with your manager. Because if you're not getting feedback, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know if you're doing well. You don't know if you're not doing so well. One of the things I often say, both to leaders and to employees when I'm coaching them, the performance review session at the end of the year, whether you do it biannually or it's an annual process or it's an ongoing process, this actually should be a formality. This should not be something, you should not have any surprises in that process. That should be a formality. If you are getting timely feedback and ongoing feedback from your manager, once again, if you're working with your manager as a partner, then you will be getting that ongoing timely feedback that is so critical to your advancement process. Mentoring and coaching. I'm going to talk about those together and separately. Mentoring and coaching, first of all, we tend to think about mentoring and coaching as external resources or someone within the organization. Actually, both of those things should start with your manager. Your manager should be both mentoring and coaching you. Now, let's talk about mentoring first. we know what the research shows in terms of mentoring, particularly with diverse talent. Women, and particularly women of color as well, also greatly benefit from mentoring, having mentors to support their advancement in an organization. Women and diverse talent who have mentors are more than likely to advance further into their career as opposed to those who don't have mentors. I also often get a question here from people of color around whether or not I should have a mentor who looks like me. Let me respond to that as well. You should have a mentor who supports your career goals. Let me repeat that. You should have a mentor who supports your career goals. Now, if you are able, particularly as a person of color, if you are able to find a mentor who fits your needs, I highly recommend that you try to have that person as your mentor, because that person is going to be able to many times identify with some of the unique challenges associated with being the intersectionality of being a woman and a woman of color. And I also think that there may be some men on this line as well, so I don't want to leave you out as well. But it is important primarily to have and identify mentors who are in alignment with your career goals. Also, the other question that I often get here is whether or not I should have an internal and an external mentor. Yes, to that question. Your internal mentor will help you in learning how to navigate the terrain within your organization. And what we call the so cultures have layers. And what we see, what we call above the waterline is what you can see happening in front of you. But there's a lot of things that's happening beneath the waterline that influences what's happening above the waterline within your culture. Your internal mentors who are higher up in the organization, they've already navigated that terrain. And so they are the ones that can help you learn how to transcend some of the challenges that you might be experiencing at your level to get to where they are. Having an external mentor also supports that process as well, because it gives you a different viewpoint. And it also gives you an objective viewpoint that you can also get from someone else that you might not always get inside your organization. All right, let's talk about coaching in the same vein. The same thing. As I said, your manager should be the first person who is supporting you in a coaching relationship. But also external coaches are great resources to have, primarily for two reasons. One is because external coaches are objective, or they should be. That is one of the primary reasons you engage an external coach, is because they can be an objective partner in your development process. The second reason you might want to engage an external coach is because they can act as accountability partners. So that's looking at both mentoring and coaching. And again, all of these things should be involved in the process of helping you to transition into becoming a formal leader. And last but not least, the networking opportunities. So networking is a critical piece of advancing in any organization. As we know, it's all about who you know many times. And so if you are making connections with people in your organizations, sometimes they know about a position or something, a role that might be coming available that you might not have access to without doing the networking. And this is, again, important to network both inside and outside of the organization. One of the things where we talked, yes, someone put in the chat about I like the idea of a board of mentors. Yes, there's the concept of what we call the personal board of directors, right? And that should include different types of people on your personal board that can support you in your development process. And that can include both a mentor and a coach. But what you also want on your personal board of directors is someone who is going to play devil's advocate. because you want someone who's going to be a straight shooter with you and who's going to be able to have real talk with you. And some things that you might be looking to do, you might not quite be ready to do that. And you want someone on your personal board of directors who can tell you that. All right. Does my panelists have anything they want to add here? Yes, Jesse.
So I want to just connect this information to the previous slide where you showed the various levels of leadership.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what that slide there, the slide that you were just covering, each of those items applies at the different level as you go up from the manager yourself to the enterprise manager.
Mm-hmm.
It's applicable, it's effective, and it's, for me, that's proven successful. But it's not something that you just do. I want to be for others to understand. As you go to your manager job, it's not something that you step away from, because even coaches need coaches to get them through the process and to help them further their skills. So, and particularly in the private sector, I find that after you get up to about the business manager, leaders tend to neglect some of those things you just covered, particularly in shaping others that are behind them. And doing a session training for those individuals. So I just wanted to emphasize that. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jess. Kim or Jill, did you want to add anything?
I think maybe just acknowledging that this list is all of the stuff that you need and should have when you're well supported by your manager. And a lot of times we don't get these, like we don't get timely feedback, right? But there are ways that we, as Sabrina said, can take control of our own careers. And there are ways that you can seek out feedback, both from your manager, but from people who are around you. And asking for feedback in ways that is not just the generic, like, hey, do you have feedback for me? But being very specific about what you're developing and asking for feedback on the meeting you ran or the communication that you sent out, or something that's actually going to get you some real useful feedback. So you are going to have to take control of a lot of these things, because a lot of times we just don't have managers who are super supportive of us.
Yes. Thank you for that, Jill. I love your idea, Jerry, around calling your mentors the kitchen table advisors. I love that. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. So we've covered what your organization should be doing to support your development process and your transition into becoming a formal leader. However, what should you know? Most of you on this call are probably emerging leaders in your organization and have been branded as such. Also, you also all are probably very high performers within your organization. But those are not the only things that are important when you are considering making the transition to a formal leadership position or managing others. Let me tell you a story about why I initially designed and developed this particular training. I actually developed a version of this training when I was still within technology. And I was working directly with the CIO, and we were in the process of going through an organizational change and transforming the organization. And we had some emerging leaders within the organization who were still on the technical track, who were considering shifting into becoming leaders. And we wanted to ensure that people were making an informed decision when they signed up that they wanted to become leaders. As Jill has already talked about, sometimes managers are not always able to support their subordinates in the way that we need the support in terms of our own development process. And we're going to get to that in a little bit. But some of the fundamental knowledge that we need in terms of making this shift, we don't always have. We see it. We see what our managers are doing. We see what other managers are doing, but we don't always necessarily know everything that's involved with shifting into that position. So let's unpack a little bit of that right now. All right. So when we think about shifting into becoming a formal manager, managing self to managing others, At each leadership passage that you saw in the diagram there on the leadership pipeline model, there is a new transition that happens and requirements, not only from a skill set requirement, but also how we utilize our time and what it is that we should be valuing as a part of the transition. I'm going to give you all a minute to take this slide in because there's a lot going on here, but this is a very important slide for our discussion. As you're taking this slide in, think about what is the first thing that strikes you as you take a look at this slide. And the second thing as you're thinking about it, is this what you imagined that you would be doing as a first-time manager in making the transition from managing self to managing others? All right. I would love for you all to share with us in chat your thoughts about what comes up for you in this slide, but let me just speak to this and then we're going to get to Q&A. There's two major takeaways from this slide. The first and foremost is I won't completely say the loss of technical skills, but the trade-off and where the emphasis. Remember, skills, time, and values. So from a skills perspective, there's a trade-off in the skills that you're going to be developing and using and needing, right? So right now, most of you are technical or professional, and that is your proficiency, and that is how you have gotten to where you are today as high performers and emerging leaders. However, what gets you to where you are is not what's going to help you advance once you move into the leadership track. Now, some of you are also, and Jill also talked about this earlier on as a part of the managers and technical leaders. So with technical leaders, you have a foot basically in both worlds. But as you advance further up the ladder, you will require less and less of your technical skills. So where I've seen many technologists struggle is they didn't really recognize that they were going to have to lose as much of utilizing their technical skills as they would when transitioning into leadership roles. Organizations are described as what we call socio-technical systems, which means that there's two interdependent systems coexisting, a social system and a technical system. When you transition into the leadership role, you then become more immersed in the social system because it is your responsibility to help your people move forward into the organization and also to get results, productivity, outcomes through your people. The major transition is no longer just you doing the delivering, but you doing the delivery through others. And we're going to talk about that more in 1 second. The other second takeaway from this slide is the relationship building skills. So remember, now you're more seated within the technical side of the organization. When you become a leader, you then transition into more of the social side of the organization, again, where you are doing more of that relationship building, whether it's up, down to your team, or sideways with your peers. And you will be doing all of those things as leaders and managers within the organization. So some of the skills that you will be requiring that you may not be as adept in right now. And the first and foremost one that comes to my mind, again, is what Jill talked about, is giving and receiving feedback. Diverse talent, what the research shows, diverse talent often, one of the issues is that diverse talent often say they're not getting the feedback that they need in order to effectively advance in their careers. And we know that this is a known issue. So as a manager, learning how to give and receive feedback is critically important. along with being able to have difficult conversations. Because when it comes to performance time, sometimes you are going to have some of those difficult conversations. And if you have not acquired those skills before you step into this role, you're going to be struggling. And that is why many managers right now are not having those discussions, because they probably, in many cases, I can't say all cases because I don't know all managers, but I know from my experience, many of them have not mastered that skill set. The other part is effective communication, influencing skills, negotiating skills. Again, these are the skills that, the soft skills, these are the skills that become more critical as you shift into leadership and management. All right, I want to make sure that I give us some time for Q&A, so I'm going to move us forward. We have one more slide. So the last slide is around the challenges associated, particularly with those like you in this group. High performers, again, the research shows that high performers actually struggle the most with making the transition from being an individual contributor to shifting into leadership and management roles. You probably say to yourself, why is that? You know, I'm a high performer, I'm smart, I can do just about anything, and I believe that you probably can. Here's the challenge that comes with many high performers. Because many of you are very adept and very skilled in your technical proficiency, relaxing that part of yourself is often a challenge. Because many of us, our work is so much enmeshed with our identity. What there is a requirement to do is to separate and detach that part of your identity and take on a new part of your identity. And this is internal work, which is the reason why the internalized versus intellect, because remember what I said, we see what's going on around us, but we haven't necessarily internalized this. There's an internal shift that has to take place of being able to produce results through others. And this is where you see a lot of managers struggle, because many managers have not made this value shift. And the value shift is, there's a value proposition of producing through others as opposed to being a self-producer. All right, I'm going to stop there. If my panelists have anything else they want to add real quick, we'll just jump into the Q&A. Jesse? Yes.
Yes, I just wanted to reiterate, you used the quote, "What got you here won't get you to the next level." And actually, the book is by Marshall Goldsmith, 2008, and it's titled, "Take It to the Next Level. What got you here won't get you there or to the next level." And that's at each of the levels. And I've just been reading some of it. And I would say one of the things that's the same at each of the levels is your brand and how you branded yourself going forward. And your brand, and I'll be sure it consists of your integrity, how people can trust you, your performance level, and all of those things that gives you your value that you're referencing here, shifting values, internalizing and taking that intellect to the next level. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Jill or Kim? All right. All right, now it's time for Q&A. Jerry, you want to tee us up?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. Hi, everybody. I'm Jerry Barrett. I work for Global Tech Women, which helps put on this event. And Sabrina, you've done an amazing job.
Thank you.
First question, I'm going to truncate them a little, but when people are being challenged in terms of applying for internal jobs, but aren't really getting considered for them, what do you recommend the company does to retain talent, and what programs should they consider for individuals to have them stay rather than leave? So what should a company be putting in place?
So that sounds like two questions to me.
Sort of.
All right, so let me tell you what I heard. Sure. What I heard is, what programs should organizations put in place to retain their top talent? That's what I heard.
Yes, exactly.
You know, what comes to mind is, I don't know that there necessarily has to be a program. You know, in terms of retaining top talent, what we know is that most individuals leave their managers as opposed to their organizations. And so this is why it's so critical to have that partnership with your manager. If you and your manager are working together to understand where it is that you are trying to get in your organization, one of the responsibilities of your manager is to be advocating for you in the room when you are not able to advocate for yourself. And so if you've made it clear, again, if you are utilizing a tool such as an IDP and you are, the two of you are working together, that your manager should also be advocating for you when you're not in the room. In terms of programs, there's nothing that immediately comes to mind in terms of a specific program that is explicit in terms of high performers. Other than, as I said, identifying high performers to be shifted into stretch assignments or given opportunities that others might not have, again, in order to keep them and retain them within the organization. I would love to hear what my panelists have to add here, because some of you have some real-time experience here. Yeah.
I think definitely for women, not just women, but also underrepresented minorities, one of the things that is very helpful internally in a company is for you all to look at your review process and try to make sure that you're removing as much bias in your review process as possible, because oftentimes that's where you see the differences in terms of reviews that women have versus and people of color have versus their counterparts. And that makes a difference in terms, and I'm sure Jill can speak to this, that might make the difference in terms of them being able to be promotable and looked at for various positions that are coming ahead. So definitely, you know, looking at that. I would say looking at pay parity within your organization. Nothing feels worse than finding out that the colleague next door to you who has not worked as long as you, who doesn't work as hard as you, is getting paid more than you. That sucks. So, you know, I would say looking at those two things, and also making sure that your managers are open and are receiving bias training, because sometimes we don't realize the biases that we come into a position, or, you know, when we're, you know, looking at review processes and things like that, that we have, and why we might not be promoting other people. It's very natural for everyone to try to like gravitate towards people who look like them, come from same backgrounds as them, but, you know, we have to work hard internally ourselves to kind of turn off those biases. So I would say those are the three things that you can look at in terms of your organization, or ask your organization to do to make sure that that path is being laid open for you to have those leadership positions.
Thank you.
I can talk about a few things that we did at Lyft. First of all, we had an internal mobility policy, which it sounds like VMware already has. But we made it very explicit that people can and should switch roles. And we had a specific process around that. And then what happens in that manager handoff piece as well. Mm-hmm. So definitely investing in those programs. From a leadership perspective, we essentially had like a trial run. So once you and your manager were in agreement that you were ready to try out management, there was a 90-day trial run where you're basically dotted line, have people reporting to you, but technically they still report to your manager. So they're having weekly one-on-ones with you, and generally bi-weekly with their, you know, on paper manager. So that you're getting regular feedback. And then at the end of the 90 days, you can say, this was not for me. Or your manager can say, this did not work out. And then you can go back to your IC role without any stigma. And that was very useful. And then the third thing that we tried was this concept of a promo sponsor program. And this was something we specifically put in place due to concerns and struggles that we were hearing from our underrepresented engineers who were saying, I want to get promoted or I want to have these opportunities available to me, but for whatever reason, I'm just stuck and my manager is not supporting me. My manager is going to block my promotion, but I really think that I'm ready. And so every time we did a 360 process, we would give people the opportunity to reach out to, it was essentially run by me and then a couple of people in our HR department, and they could ask for a promo sponsor. And this was an experienced, like tenured at Lyft manager that we knew was good at giving feedback, who could be this neutral third party, who could step in and like review your packet, figure out what's going on, go talk to your manager, have conversations with your peers. And a lot of times what we found through this program was that people were not necessarily being held back from promotions, but they were actually like in some other just like funk with their manager where they, maybe their manager wasn't figuring out how to give feedback in a way that lands appropriately for a woman of color or for somebody who speaks English as a second language. And so we were able to intervene in a lot of these situations. And in some cases, we either kind of fixed the issue by giving them this like mentor, third party experienced manager to work with them, or we could move them to another team that we felt would be more appropriate with a manager who is more suited to them. And so that was, initially meant for promotions, but around the time, unfortunately, like around the time that I left, was when we were talking about expanding this program and not tying it to promotions, but tying it more towards people who just felt stuck in their roles.
Yep.
So I would add to what Kim and Jill said, and say in my 42 years in the workforce, my first 32 was in a very rigid environment, which was the Air Force, that had a very structured, what you call an individual development plan. We called it career progression ladder. But it still comes down, that experience plus my job in the federal service and now in the coaching, it comes down to preparation. You must be prepared for the opportunity to come to you. Prior planning prevents some things. So you must be, I can't give you the military version, but you must be prepared for an opportunity when it comes to you. And in earlier slides, you mentioned you also have to advocate for yourself. But key among that is performance, because it pivots on performance and trust and integrity. But you have to advocate. I have 2 adult daughters that are in the workforce. I've had these conversations. I had a conversation with one of them in preparation for them. And she shared with me, as a woman of color, it is difficult getting promoted internally. And she has followed the philosophy I've shared with her over my mentoring to her. Be prepared. And I see some of the comments are, you're not happy where you are. Sometimes you just have to leave the organization to advance. It's not, everyone is a good fit. So if it's not a good fit and you've done all you could, you've held the hard, difficult conversations, then you need to consider some other options as you proceed in your career. But you still need to be prepared. Thanks.
Thank you, Jess. Jerry, I think we have time for one more question, but before we go there, so thank you, panelists. Great input as well for that question. And some of the things that we've talked about touches a lot on, honestly, a whole different workshop around cultivating inclusive workplaces. One of the things, yes, there's the old adage around move up or move out. Yes, that's always a consideration, but just keep in mind that many times you want to ensure, and there's no way you can actually ensure this, but sometimes you want to be careful that you don't jump out of the pot into the fire. Because many times, particularly in this space, this is a small space. It's a relatively small space. And so therefore, there's some key questions that you should be asking if you are considering leaving the organization and you're considering going into another organization. There's some key questions that you should ask before going into another organization to at least help block some of what you might be experiencing in your current organization. And as I said, we don't have time to really unpack that. Go ahead, Jerry.
Actually, Sabrina, we have until 12 o'clock, not 11:30.
Oh.
So
Oh, really?
we have another half hour.
Oh, great.
Okay. But we don't have to unpack yet. We still have some more questions.
Yes.
Two of them I'm going to ask them together because they're both versions of the same question. But if you're if you want to move from being an individual to being a people manager, and you want to present yourself for promotion or even apply to a new company, what are some of the things you should do? How do people make that jump from individual contributor to people manager?
How do you make the jump from? Go ahead, Jill.
No, I have thoughts on this.
I know you do.
So I can only speak for like the organizations that I've been in. Typically, I will not hire somebody as a manager if they don't have prior manager experience. And the reason for that is because, it can be so damaging to put somebody in a management position if A, they don't like it, or B, they're not good at it. And then you have to figure out what to do with them. Did they actually, do they want to go back to an IC? Well, we didn't interview them as an IC. And so I would much rather hire somebody who shows interest in management, potential for leadership, maybe has held a team lead role, but I'm likely going to interview that person as an individual contributor and then put them on a track to management. And there are many, many times where I've had a need, or I know I have an impending need, and I'm willing to bring somebody in as an IC, have them work in that position for like 90 days or so, and then we'll start that transition. So I've done that before. In terms of like actually getting somebody to support you in that transition to management, usually when I'm coaching folks, we're talking about ways that you can prove that you're already a manager. And Sabrina mentioned this before, you get promoted when you've been performing in the position. Mm-hmm. And so for me, when I was transitioning to management, I actually ran into this. I asked my manager if I could become a manager, and he was like, oh, not now, but he wasn't really paying attention to me. He wasn't like helping me through that transition. And so I just slowly started to like take things off of his plate. And I said, okay, I'm going to manage all the dependencies for this project. And don't worry about this. I'm going to handle all the communications. And then I started having one-on-ones with some of my peers. Mm-hmm. And there was kind of a point where my manager couldn't really tell me that I couldn't be a manager because I kind of already was one. Mm-hmm. And so the end of that was that I didn't actually transition to management on that team. I wound up finding a different team in which to make the transition. And that goes back to, again, what Sabrina said about networking and making sure that you're talking to a lot of different people and you know where those opportunities are going to crop up. Because if you're just sitting and waiting for the right opportunity to crop up on your team, you might be sitting and waiting for a while. It may depend on, do you have other good technical leads on the team? Are you going to have openings on the team? And so making sure that I had enough connections so that when the right opportunity opened up at the right time, I could say, hey, look, I've been practically managing this team over here. I can come manage your team too.
Yes. So thank you for that, Jill. I love that example. And one of the other things that I would also say, and you talked about this, is the team lead. It is very difficult to hire someone into a leadership role, as Jill said, that does not have experience. It can just be a train wreck. And I've definitely seen this happen more than once. But some of the ways that you can actually get the experience that you might need in order to transition into a management role is, first and foremost, make it known that that's what you're interested in doing. Number one. Number two is, this is where the succession planning comes in. Does your current manager have a named successor? If they don't, ask if you could be identified for that position or to be identified as that person. And then what are some of the things that you can start, as Jill talked about, taking off of his or her plate so that you can start to learn and get some of the necessary skills. I'll share with you something that I did in the past. So I was at IBM at the time, and I was in an IC, and I had identified that I wanted to step into a management role. Now, fortunately for me, I actually had been a manager before, but I had not actually done project manager. I had not been a project manager, and I saw that's exactly what I wanted to do. And so I started learning everything that I could about project management. And this was prior to certification, so I'm dating myself a little bit here, but that's okay. I learned everything that I could about project management. I revamped my resume to support that, to support stepping into project management. And then I did not apply for any other job other than project management jobs. Now, I was very fortunate in what happened in terms of my career, because what happened is I interviewed with a manager, and this was literally 20 years ago, and she and I are still friends. And so this is how well our partnership worked. I interviewed with her, and she said, you don't have enough experience to step into a project management role. But what I will do is I will hire you, because she says, you're smart. You can do just about any role that you want. I can already see that. She said, but we need to get you some experience under your belt. I will hire you onto the team, and I will make you a team lead. And then in a year, we will revisit you being promoted into that position. A year later, I had her job. With her blessing, she stepped into another role in the organization, and they hired me into her role. And actually what happened, this is actually really pertinent to the discussion that we're having, because my organization actually wanted to bring in an external person to do the role and not hire me as the internal person, woman of color, into this role. Think about this, in technology 20 years ago. And so what I said to them is, I had already started assuming the roles for her. She sat in another building, and me and the rest of the team sat in the war room in another building. So I was the day-to-day manager already. And so I said to them, either you hire me into the role or I'm leaving. And it wasn't like blackmail. It was that's just where I was. I knew what my value was to the organization. I was already doing the role, and I was already doing the work. So to bring someone else in who I would then have to train up and then put them over me, I just wasn't willing to accept that. But I did the work in order to help transition into the management position by becoming a team lead, then a project manager, then I transitioned into the management role. Thanks for that question. Jerry?
It was a good question. Let's see. We just got so many more questions. So did your manager, this is interesting, did your manager start to show negative feelings towards you and insecurities when you took work away to demonstrate leadership? And I think the follow-up to that should be, and what do you do about that? What do you do when that happens?
Oh, that's for me. My managers have always been so supportive. I mean, I will say, like, people can get threatened by anybody. I guess, like, I have talked to people who've experienced this, and the way that I've asked them to position it is, first of all, I'm taking work off your plate that you don't want to do. Taking work off your plate you don't have to do. And also, like, I'm freeing you up to do bigger and better things. And now you get to claim success for the things that I do. So there is some amount of strategic, like, making your manager look good if you're in a situation where they're feeling threatened by you, but thankfully I haven't had to be in that position. You're muted.
Like, unmute myself. Yes, so let me give the question back so I can make sure I got it right. If your manager is feeling threatened by you based on some of the things that you're doing on the team, is that the question? How do you handle that?
Yes.
So I'm a firm believer in handling things at the simplest level. Have a conversation with them. if you are experiencing some behaviors that you perceive as your manager might be feeling threatened by you, ask, and listen, you don't have to say, I'm sensing things that is making me think that you're feeling threatened by me. That's not what I'm suggesting here. What I'm suggesting is simply asking the question as, are we having some challenges, or just very innocuously. In that way, you can and move further into maybe a more direct conversation that might address some of the behaviors that you're seeing. There is, I think, Marshall Rosenberg has a model that he uses for nonviolent communication, and what it talks about is, when this happens, I have this response, and this is what I would like. And often in using that model, it enables you to tee up what might be a difficult conversation. And this is actually practice for you if you are considering becoming a manager, because this is called managing up. And this is something that you will have to do when you become a leader. And so being able to have that difficult conversation, and I can tell you, I've had these types of conversations with my manager in the past, just based on what you've seen. And I can tell you, depending on how you handle it, it actually can strengthen your relationship with your manager. If it's not handled in the right way, then there's other alternatives. But yeah, that can go and serve as a benefit to you if you are able to simply just ask the question. That's what has been the best outcome in my experience.
One question is, how do you balance executing your day-to-day responsibilities and developing your leadership skills? So how do you've got a million, and everyone, especially now, has a million things.
Yeah.
How do you build in that time for professional development?
Well, let Jesse take it, and then I'll add mine.
My personal motto has been is that one, you have to make time for yourself. And if it's important to you, then you will schedule your day around it.
That's right.
I've had personal experience. I've completed in my life 3 master's degrees and started upon a doctoral degree, to include some of the other professional military education that I've had. I will admit I have high energy, and that has gotten me through. For those that don't have that level of energy, and in coaching, I share with them that one, set some time aside. You can either do formal academic, or you can get you some books on self-improvement that will help you to understand. And third, be introspective, meaning reflect on what is important to you, where you are, where you're currently sitting in that work environment, and then carve out that time. I have a son who has 6 children. I witnessed him do that. So I'll stop there.
Okay. Thank you, Jesse. So one of the things, as Jesse just talked about in his answer, is we make time for what's important to us. And many times, because, and I'll use myself as an example here. Since we've been in the COVID crisis, I've had an opportunity to really restructure my day in terms of how I'm utilizing my time. And what I found is that when I went back and did my introspection and my reflection time, is that I was dedicating 90% of my time to others. I love my work. And so, I would just be doing the work, because when you're doing something you love, it's not work. But what I also recognized was that I was not giving enough time for myself for some of the things, for instance, where I want to go, or where I might want to take my business, or what I might want to learn. Like, for instance, when I was still a technologist and wanting to shift into a technical position. Most organizations have have dollars set aside for professional development. And so, and I also know that what happens many times is because people are so busy, they many times don't take it. take it. It's free money. And you want to take advantage of it. If your organization is going to support your development process, that is money that you don't have to come out of your pocket with in order to support where it is that you're trying to get to. So one of a good practice is really, one of the things that I would do is I would come in earlier in the morning, or I would stay later in the evening. So, because many times, many of us spend the majority of our time in meetings all day. And so how do you set some time on your calendar that can't be touched for you? And so if you come in earlier during the day, or maybe stay an hour later to get something done that you might not was able to get done in real time, prioritizing you first. And I can tell you, I coach a lot of women. And one of the problems we have is, one of the primary issues we have is putting others first. And we are holding the door for them, right? And we may not even get in line at all. So I'm going to invite you to change that paradigm and do what the airlines talked about. Put your oxygen mask on first before helping others. All right, Jill. Yes, absolutely.
I've taken a lot of leadership courses, taken many Sabrina workshop in my time. The most effective leadership course or activity I've ever done is just getting together with like 8 managers and sitting in a room and talking about a topic. And we have a structure for these. At Pilot, we call them manager circles. I think Facebook calls them manager circles. At Twitter, we call them manager forums. And we met with the same group of people every month or every 3 weeks or so, 90 minutes, laptops down. Like, you couldn't keep people away from these sessions. They were so useful. Mm-hmm. There's no one right way to manage. You are going to come across many different personalities. People are going to respond to coaching and feedback in different ways. And the best thing that you can do is just learn from other people's experiences and their mistakes. Yes. And so if you can take time to sit down at lunch, or to just grab an hour or an hour and a half with some folks and just talk about the things that you're experiencing. And then the key here is you don't give each other advice. You only speak from your own experience, and people can take away what they want to take away from that. Those have been the most helpful sessions to me.
Yes, great. Thank you, Jill. The only other thing I will add to that is the skip levels. I'm not sure if you all in your organizations, many of you have skip levels, but I highly recommend the skip levels as well. Again, this is making known what it is that you are trying to do. And if you get an opportunity not only to partner with your manager, but also get an opportunity to speak to your manager's manager, you're going up the chain to let them know what it is that you are trying to do in terms of your career aspirations. And that's another set of eyes and ears that are available to advocate for you. One other thing is information interviews. So one of the things that I would use, and this is a really good tool to use, and again, we all know these things intuitively, but being intentional and deliberate is what's going to enable us to get from where we are to where we want to be. And you know, in doing an information interview, I would recommend it's not more than 30 minutes, 45 minutes tops. You don't want to necessarily take up a lot of person's time, or even maybe over lunch and you buy the lunch, you know, so that you are able to gain some of the knowledge that you want. And here's the other thing that comes up for me. It is the informal network. So a lot of information is passed through the informal network in organizations, and diverse talent is often left out of those circles. And so I've seen people share more information over lunch, at happy hour, coffees, than you will ever hear many times within the organization. So if you can get tied into the informal network, and that's the proverbial water cooler conversations, if you can get connected to that, that's also a good strategy as well. All right, one more question? Yeah.
Yes. Oh no, we have lots of questions.
Okay.
One is from a woman, and she says her challenge is that she is surrounded by older white men who have their own views of being managed by a younger woman. How would you overcome that? And I have to say, I've heard older white women have the same problem with younger white men.
Jesse, do you want to take that? I have some thoughts there, but I know that you have some experience with that, particularly in the military. And then I'll speak to it in the environment, in the technical environment.
So I'll share several perspectives. I entered the military in 1973, and then it was a predominantly white male environment. Over those times, what you laughing about, Sabrina? Over those times, since that time, I watched a tremendous transformation occur in defense and the private sector, where there are a lot more women in the workforce. My last 10 of my last 12 years in defense, I was supervised by a younger white female who shared with me she experienced many of these challenges having grown up. And I was in the research and engineering environment. So she was a civil engineer. And so she had to come in through that environment, and she shared with me many of the challenges that she encountered in that environment. And in this case, she was at least probably 6 to 8 years younger than I was as my supervisor. And many of those who reported to her were younger. So from what I witnessed in her experience, one, she was very good when she was technical, and then as she became a senior executive leader in defense, she completed those leadership training that Jill has mentioned earlier, and some of the things Sabrina did. But what I noticed about her is that she was tremendously adept at networking, leading upward, even when, and Sabrina mentioned that earlier, leading upward even when there was resistance and perseverance. And I think as I watched her work at the seniors level in defense in the Pentagon, and she and I went over to the Hill to talk to several congressmen and women who were also our seniors and predominantly white, is that she was very confident, and she had presence about her in her environment as she was working. So that's what I have to add on that one.
Thank you, sir. All right. What I will say, and I can tell you, I chuckled to myself when I heard this question, because that question is the reason why I'm doing diversity work today. I actually started my career in technology in the military environment with the Marine Corps. And so you can imagine I was a young African-American female in a Marine Corps captain's position. And I was the only one, and I was running the IT department at the district headquarters. And I can tell you, I was raked over the coals. Actually, I spent 5.5 years in that position. That's actually how I ended up at IBM in an individual contributor position, because I said I didn't want to manage anybody else again after that experience. I actually did end up going back into management again. However, it was a really, really, really tough experience. Being in a military environment, as in the body that I occupy, again, with the intersection of race and gender, was extremely difficult being in a leadership position in that environment. My experience in the military environment, and Jesse's right, it has changed quite a bit, but when I was in that environment, it was extremely sexist. And I had to navigate those hurdles as well in working with predominantly, well, all ages, but were predominantly white males. And I can tell you what I've experienced is a couple of things. One is leaders recognize talent. And so if you are performing, leaders want their organizations to succeed. And if you are the one many times who can get it there, they will give you a chance to do that. That's been my personal experience. Now, that's not everybody's experience, but I can just say to you that that has been my personal experience. Because also being in an organization with predominantly white males, many times when we are in diverse circles and we are on in these types of sessions, white males sort of become like many white males imagine themselves as being the enemy. There's mixed, all of us have had mixed experience with white males. I'm not going to make white males the villain here, because I've also had some very good experiences in my career with senior white males. So I've had mixed, and I've also had some challenging experiences, but with Black females. So I just want to be 100% transparent here and have real talk with you all this morning or afternoon, wherever we are. So being able to perform is the number one thing. Second, as Sabrina has added here, perseverance and resilience, it's critical. But another thing, again, in doing my work with women, what the research shows is that our internal barriers do as much as the external barriers to keep us from advancing in our careers and shifting into leadership positions. We are always going to encounter someone who does not think we should be there. We have to know within ourselves that if this is where I'm aiming for, it's where I belong. And as a result, stay the course. And another thing, particularly in an environment where you are the only, develop allies. Understand, try your best to understand what it is that, because many times it's based on fear, it's based on just people not having access and experience with working with younger people. I cannot tell you how many spaces I'm in today when I hear older baby boomers talk about millennials in a negative way. Conversely, I hear millennials talk about baby boomers in a negative way. And so it's just because they don't really understand each other. And so if I was in that environment, I would, once again, it's just about having a conversation. And sometimes the conversation doesn't work, because trust me, I've tried it before. So the conversations don't always work. But if you can identify some allies who can support you in your development process in that environment, that can also help with what it is that you're trying to achieve within an environment like that as a woman in an all male environment.
One thing I would add on top of that, Sabrina, because I was going to say that very same thing, is, find your sponsors and champions within that environment.
Right.
And, sometimes, like, even if you're just in meetings, have the person, like, once you build that relationship, that person can advocate on your behalf within a meeting, and they will bring you up as, expert leader on
That's right.
And so sometimes you have to, like, partner with someone to move both your brand and your agenda forward. The other thing that I would say is probably one of the greatest pieces of advice that I've gotten for myself as a woman of color, particularly working in, a majority environment, was don't take it personal. And at first I was like, what do you mean by that? Like, this is personal. Right. It hurts. Like a death by 1,000 cuts. Like, we know that's going to happen. But sometimes those slights and things are just not about you. It's probably 90% about the other person. And so once I internalized that advice, things that might have come at me that didn't help me move forward, or, projects that got dismantled because of other people's issues, I just learned to, like, let those things go and just move forward with my own agenda. As Sabrina said, nobody can advocate for you better than you. And so I would let it go and move on to my next project, which I was stellar at. So I think for me, like I said, I think the best piece of advice that I could give you is don't take it personal, and just move forward with the work. Because I know, we think about the work that we do and we put so much time, energy, and emotion around it. Sometimes you have to let that go. And I think particularly for women of color, we tend to be super hard workers and our identity is tied to that, but actually that's not your identity. Your work is not your identity. So I would suggest, trying not to take it personal.
And manage his ass out. If he doesn't respect you, I've done all of this before. I have my boss step in and help. If he's gonna make things miserable for you, manage his ass out.
Yep. I agree.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we've got time for one more question. And I think this one is something that's really impacting everyone today is, your function is underinvested and work is piling up on your team and team morale is starting to take a hit. What are some solutions for both the team and yourself? What do you do when things seem bleak, which a lot of us are dealing with these days?
I want to jump in here first, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Within my organization now at ServiceNow, I'm actually new. I'm like 4 weeks old into my organization. One of the things that I've really appreciated is that we start out each meeting with asking, how are you doing? Like literally asking, how are you doing? And legitimately caring about that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that says a lot about the culture in terms of how they care about their employees and our health and just making sure that we're, doing okay. So yeah, we might spend the first like 10 minutes of the, meeting just talking about our challenges that we have being at home, dealing with COVID-19, all of that stuff, and we also take time to talk about gratitude too, and what are we grateful for, and that automatically puts us in a very positive place, and then I think just talking about things that we're grateful for helps us to be positive about the work that we're doing. And I think it also opens up everyone on the team to think about ways in which we can be supportive of each other. But the other piece of it is also asking for help and being open to asking for help. I think, as individual contributors, oftentimes we think that, I just have to do this on my own, or you don't want the impression that you're not capable of getting your work done or anything like that, but that's not really what it's about. It's about how can I ask for help in order to succeed. So, there are definitely ways that you can frame the question so you don't, feel like you're being inadequate as an employee, but I think it's okay to ask for help or let your manager know that you're experiencing some challenges and ask them for their advice in terms of how to prioritize the things that you're working on so that you can be successful.
Great. Thank you, Kim. I know that Jill and Jesse also have something they want to add here, but we are like 1 minute left, and I just want to make sure that we have time to thank you all for attending our session. I have really enjoyed my first international webinar. And I hope that the information that we've been able to impart today has been somewhat useful to all of you emerging leaders. And I think we all are accessible, particularly via LinkedIn. If you all want to follow up with any of us on the call via LinkedIn, please feel free to do so. I'll let the panelists one more time say who they are and what their organization is with, or provide their LinkedIn handle so that you all know how to reach them. Kim? Oh, Jill, since you're unmuted, we'll start with you.
Okay, hi everybody. Jill Wetzler. You find me on LinkedIn, find me on Twitter, Jill Wetzler.
Kim?
Kimberly McLeod. You can find me on LinkedIn.
Jess, thank you. Jesse?
Thanks to all. Jesse Citizen. You can find me on LinkedIn, Citizen Consulting Services.
Thank you all very much. Enjoy the rest of your day, wherever that might find you.